Cool. Yeah, let's start off where we always start off. I mean, authenticity is such a buzzword, and I feel like we often don't get a chance to actually define it for ourselves. And everyone has their own definition for it. What does it mean to you? What do you think about when the word authenticity is mentioned?
Yeah, to me, it's reasonably simple, which is just being who you are in every sense, in a 360 way. So who you are in terms of your roots, who you are in terms of what you like, what you don't like, who you are in terms of your passions and how you think about business and how you think about life. And, of course, being respectful and sensitive to how other people see life, to other people's authenticity as well, right? And part of that authenticity is your sensitivity to some of our, collective differences.
Yeah, and I'm sure that a little bit of that definition has probably changed throughout your life. But you mentioned such a powerful word, like your roots. Tell me, what are your roots? Like, where are you from? Where's your family from?
Yeah, I'm originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina. So I was born there, grew up there, fortunately had a chance to travel a little bit. And then when I started my career, actually my first job was my own company. When I was a teenager, I DJ'd. I was a mobile DJ, and I did that throughout college and so on. I loved it, and it's still part of my life. But when I started to call it my more serious or more aligned with my college education and so on career, I had a chance to travel a bit, and then I came to the US to study in 2000. I thought I would save some money and go back home, and the economy in Argentina just tanked, and I had an awesome opportunity here, and one thing led to the other, and here I am 21 years later.
I love that. I love how one of your first jobs is actually being a DJ. Like, what led you to even want to be a DJ in the first place?
Well, I loved music. I was not a good musician, and I wanted to, buy a lot of music, and I didn't have enough money to buy the amounts of music that I wanted to buy. So I figured that, being a DJ would give me a chance to do that. So I started doing it, and people started liking it, and then I got hired in clubs and started having, a bunch of other jobs pop up and hiring other DJs to work for me and so on. So before I knew it, I was employing 12 mobile DJs in different places and whatnot. So it was a lot of fun, particularly being really young, because, I started when I was 14.
What?
And I would say that, yeah. So
what were you DJing quinceañeras? Like, what were you doing?
yeah. So in Argentina, the quinceañeras are called fiesta de quince. So I was definitely doing a bunch of those, and also like school parties, like high school parties, and there were a lot of like fundraisers where it would be like a fashion show or things like that, where I would be, DJing for that. And then I started DJing in clubs, and doing a mix of like mobile DJing and clubs.
That is so fascinating. So you're telling me if your career wasn't in media, you'd probably be like Steve Aoki or something.
There you have it. And look, I still DJ. This last Friday, I DJed for our company. So I did a quick, hour-long set live stream. It was called Seasons of Love, and it was kind of celebrating some of the summer and winter and so on. And all of the songs in the set had love in it. So that was part of it, and it was mostly house music.
The fact that you called it a set means you're like a true DJ. That's crazy. It's so interesting that you are like, even so at 14, you started DJing, and now just in your executive leadership role, like you're still comfortable DJing. Like, I find it so interesting because I always think of the example, and we spoke about this before, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, David Solomon.
Yeah.
Like he's also a DJ on the side, and he just does it for fun. But there was a couple years ago where the New York Times essentially outed him, and I remember he was getting pressure from his board of directors to stop being a DJ because they said, it doesn't go with the image of what an executive is supposed to look like. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially kind of what it was. Yeah. Like, do you think about those things, like when you step in?
Look, I think going back to your question on being authentic, couple of things. One, probably call it 10 years ago, when I was earlier in my career, maybe I would have thought a little bit more about it. But even at that time, maybe I would have thought a little bit more about it relative to my superiors, right? And maybe relative to our board or things like that. Hey, maybe you need to look more serious, more professional, or, you know, whatever that might be. But we are all humans. We all like to have fun and, you know, and mix work and life and enjoyment and so on. And to me, music brings a very unique energy to life and everything that we do. I mean, for a reason, say in the ads business, you know, ads have some music, you know, and so on. It's like, it comes with, you know, it comes with that as part of human emotion. So I would say I worried a little bit more about that in the past, but in some ways it was also one of those things. And this also goes back to, you know, being a Latino in business and going back to our roots and so on, something that is unique and interesting, right? Because, you know, when you highlight that, even if some people might cringe a little bit or whatever that might be, there's for as many people who might cringe, there will be other people who would be like, oh, that's cool. And what music do you like? And, you know, and it creates this new bond on something that is unique about you. And similarly also, you know, when it comes to my roots, when I say Argentina, there may be some people who have traveled there or who like soccer or football, which is the way, you know, we call it in Argentina and so on, who, you know, will connect with you on some of those things as well. So anyways, maybe I over answered your question, but I would say nowadays I really see it as an integral part of who I am. And, you know, when I was hired at Verizon, as an example, everyone who hired me knew that I was doing this, and it was almost like, okay, and when are you going to, you know, do your first set, right?
It was part of your contract. It was like, you have to DJ once a month.
Exactly. It's yeah, exactly.
No, but I resonate with that because I feel like I've missed out on so many opportunities to build relationships with people because, like you said earlier in my career, I would not share certain things, right? I remember being at dinners with colleagues and I would be so quiet and I would like not talk about my weekends or I wouldn't talk about my passions. And when I really started building relationships with people is when I said something, you know, for example, oh yeah, I was DJing this weekend. And there was this instant interest of, oh, well, I don't know like no one else on the team is a DJ. Tell me about what that life is like. Do you remember that first experience when you potentially opened up and started making those connections?
Yeah, I think, look, for me, the DJing, I'm going to kind of break this into two. For me, the DJing part has almost been a part of my life ever since, you know, 14. So, you know, when I came here, I mentioned I came here to business school and so on. I would be the resident DJ in the business school parties and so on. So it was almost like everyone would know that I was a DJ. And, you know, I even have it, if you look at my bio and so on, you will see it somewhere there, right? So even when I was interviewing for jobs and so on, it would be on my resume. So whoever would pick it up, they would be like, oh, you were DJing, you know, and so on. So I don't think that there was ever a time where it was necessarily hidden, if you will, with the people that I was working with. I would say maybe a little more of the other part that was a bit more closeted, if you will, would be, you know, I would be in meetings and people would look at me and they would look at my name and it's like Iván, and then Markman is my last name, and then the accent, and they would try to figure out like where I was from. Like, are you Russian or, you know, like where are you from? So I would say that maybe a little bit more of that in terms of the roots and trying to connect the dots. Maybe that was something that particularly in I would say more senior environments, it was just not discussed, right? It was more like, okay, we don't even want to go there, right? Let's talk business, do your presentation, you know, whatever that might be, and then go back and do your job and so on. I think that more recently, I would say probably in the last, call it 2 to 5 years, it's become a bit more open in that sense. So I would say that from that standpoint, particularly in board level settings, like public company board level settings or things like that, it's become a little bit more open. and also, quite frankly, a topic of conversation, right? Because when you think about D&I and some of these topics, and you go back 5 years, it wasn't really a board level type discussion topic, right?
Yeah. What do you think are some of the major reasons why it's becoming a lot more apparent, or a topic of conversation?
I think personally, fortunately, a lot of events in terms of the last few years with, a range of different aspects, ranging from, Me Too to Black Lives Matter, and, a host of issues like that within the US brought it to the fore. And I would say in other countries for different reasons. And then, some of these, given the scale of, say, media within the US and elements like that, they also become a little bit more mainstream globally, just around this, where you see, Black Lives Matters, people showing support in Germany, right? Or, in a bunch of other countries, but, on movements that maybe had more eminence here and then kind of spread out and so on. Again, this could be unfair to the Germans, right? Because I'm sure that there's a lot of, history and other elements there. But I would say that more broadly, it just became more of an agenda item in the last couple of years as a result of all of that.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Germany is just, insert any country within Germany that could be placed in there, just to share that story. Yeah. No, that I agree. I mean, I see it a topic of conversation everywhere. I mean, you even see institutions like NASDAQ, for example, like implementing policies, not yet, right? But they're proposing policies for public companies to have a certain number of board members be diverse, whatever that means for them. It's interesting. I've always wondered too, because, there are levels of employees, right? They're like individual contributors, they're your managers, directors, and then, there's like the C-suite and executives of with that nature. I'm wondering too, like at your level, right? There's not that many people that are Latino. Like, do you feel like a certain sense of pressure on your end to, just culturally or representatively in that space?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One is, I love the opportunity to be a voice and a sponsor in any way that I can. So I would say that is one, and to the extent that, from a mentorship standpoint or support standpoint, that there's anything I can do, that is something that I really appreciate. So more than pressure, I would say it's gratefulness, right? To be able to do that. I do think that in some ways, and maybe not so much now where I'm at in my career, but again, I would say 5 to 10 years ago, I would feel a sense of maybe lack of security or a challenge and so on, a little bit of, hey, am I going to be able to keep progressing? And, am I going to, how much success am I going to have relative to my own growth aspirations, tied to that, and tied to the fact that there's a host of cultural elements that I don't bring, and things that are more like traditional business culture elements. I would be like, I don't play golf, whatever, a host of other things. I haven't gone to the schools that, maybe some of these folks may have gone to, or may not have the same club affiliations, whatever that might be. That I'm like, hey, I'm clearly different, and to what extent will my merits and personality and, whatever comes with my package be good enough, to keep growing. So I definitely felt that, and you could think of that as pressure, if you will, in terms of, hey, some level of doubt on that front.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? Because at your level, you have such a track record at this point of proving yourself and in business, et cetera, and leadership. I do want to go back, since you mentioned it, just like to 5-10 years ago. Tell me about that experience, and just what that was like navigating this almost like a new culture.
Yeah. Well, I think that for me, there were 2 or 3 things. One is really focusing on results, right? So really understanding like, what are the results that matter, right? And then how do I drive those results in a way that are consistent with my principles and value? And how do I build partnerships that are mutually supportive, for lack of a better word? And I have to say, I'm incredibly grateful to my managers over the years, because, you know, I'll give you an example. My first manager coming out of school is just an amazing person. And I will never forget that, you know, he took me to lunch as part of my onboarding. And he was asking me about my experience in business school. And I told him about an onboarding that we had for international MBAs, and that I had attended a baseball game. This was my first baseball game. And I don't know why I started going off on baseball and saying it's so boring, it's so slow, I don't understand how people can like this sport. And so I don't know why I was so passionate about that. Anyways, we had a great lunch, and we went back to work. And then the following day, I went to lunch with someone who has become a dear friend. He's Italian. And we were talking about football and soccer and this and that, and I somewhat brought up this lunch conversation, and he was like, "Oh no, your boss loves baseball. He's like a massive baseball fan." And so I was like, "Oh no, in my first week on the job, I've already offended my boss." But I think he was amazing in having that empathy and openness and so on. But also, he was very much like results driven, right? Like, hey, this is the impact that we're trying to have. And also, I think embracing, when I think back at that team, and so it was very diverse. He is an Asian American, and I think his family was very diverse and so on. But so maybe that may have helped a little bit. But in any case, the point being is that I think that one thing early on was focusing on results, building partnerships that were based on principles. And again, as much as I didn't find any enjoyment in baseball and he loved baseball, right? We found a host of other things in common. He ended up coming to my wedding in Argentina a few years later, and so on. So, and we've stayed like lifelong friends ever since. This is, almost 20 years ago, right? So I would say focus on results, partnerships. And once again, going back to your earlier question on authenticity, being authentic and respectful, right? Which is what you expect of others, which is be authentic and also be respectful and embracing.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's so funny, the baseball example, because I think baseball is it's such a boring sport. It's so interesting too, because baseball is like one of the only sports that doesn't have a time limit. And also so for example, if you're in a soccer field, all the soccer fields are the same distance, right? The basketball courts, they're the same distance. Tennis, same distance, same length of the court, etc. Football field, the same thing. Baseball's the only sport where a home run is different in Yankee Stadium compared to Met Stadium, compared to they're all different. There's no like uniformity in it.
Yeah, that's very unique.
So interesting. Okay, so baseball, that's one challenge that you experienced when you got here as well. Was there anything else when you got here, and in particular more so like in the professional setting, when you said, okay, well, not necessarily that you had to maybe hide who you were, but this is an adjustment?
Yeah, look, I was completely blind and naive, if you will, to just elements of business culture. And look, some of this may be my own bad in terms of not doing more research about it and so on, and being a little bit more intuitive around it. But, I felt that I did feel confidence in my ability to build and forge those relationships, right? But I had no idea about a ton of things around protocol and elements like that. And I'm sure that I messed up more than one time without even knowing it, right? So I think my my constant kind of sense was a little bit of back to what I shared before is, am I doing this right? Like, am I, am I having the right level of engagement when we're going out as a team, or when we are with clients, or when we're doing things, And I think my biggest challenge on some of the things was that without having the cultural background, say with clients as an example, someone who has grown up here, maybe they have grown up in the same city, or they have been in a few cities and so on. When someone says, oh, I studied in such and such school, or I played in such and such sports team, or whatever that might be, they will be able to connect a lot faster. And I didn't have that. So I needed some other way to be able to connect, because I'm like, hey, I just don't have it, right? Nobody knows, or well, very few people would know within the US what Universidad San Andres is, right? Or, even where it is, right? So, so I think that was something that was a challenge. So it was mostly trying to find points of connection. And, there's lots of things, like you can talk more about current events, but even when you talk about current events, having the sensitivity for, people maybe connecting with those current events in different ways, and also understanding a lot of my views on current events might be seen through the lens of an Argentinian, right, as opposed to someone from the United States and so on. So I would say that those were the challenges. They're not gone. They are still my challenges today, right? But I would just say that maybe with the years, I've become more comfortable with those. And more comfortable with, this goes back to your first point on authenticity and so on. It's like, hey, even if I don't have a lot of those things, I will never have them, right? But I may have some other things that are also valuable that maybe are not within the background or the way that other people are, and so on. And those things are really, this is what makes us all as a global community, as human beings, more powerful, more enjoyable, more learning prone, so many positive things, right? So it's like, how do you take all of the kind of positive elements of that and really use them for something that is productive, as opposed to maybe kind of shutting down and, not connecting.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think finding those commonalities are powerful. I mean, the way that you move up in corporate America is, I mean, in my opinion, is sure, it's results driven. You need to drive what matters, but also a big piece of that is just relationship building as well. Being able to be top of mind if an opportunity comes up, and then pairing that with the results is, how you move up.
Yeah.
It's funny though. I don't know if you experienced this too, but going back to the baseball example, if I knew nothing about baseball and let's say my entire team was really passionate about baseball, I would spend weekends and even during the weekdays, if like a night game, I would spend like studying baseball. I was like, okay, what's a first base coach? What's a home run? What's all of these things? And I think that's where I struggled early on, was like, yes, like trying to keep up with current events, but in a way, like I was forcing myself to keep up with current events that didn't necessarily interest me as well. You know what I mean? So like that was a way to build relationships, but at the same time, it was like not the most authentic way. Whereas like, then I found myself finding current events that also interested me and making that relatable as well. So like I had to sort of like struggle with the relatability and finding current events that didn't interest me, and then finding like my own path. Did you struggle with that as well?
I would say not so much. So the way that I dealt with some of those things was, I'll give you an example. We would play fantasy sports with teams in the office and so on. I would always lose, and sometimes I would win because random, like my picks were completely random. Oh, I like this person, or I like this player, whatever that might be. But I almost made fun of it, right? And it was like, hey, I'm going to prove that I can do better in fantasy sports than someone who actually knows a lot about it, right? And that would be like the fun thing. So I would say, and again, maybe that wasn't one of my most effective strategies and so on, but maybe call it laziness or whatever that might be, that I'm like, okay, on the things that I don't know and I don't care as much about, I'll find a way to participate that is authentic to me and that may be fun or whatever that might be. And again, that it will be fun without being like self-deprecating or, you know, accepting aggressions or whatever that might be, but really like, hey, I don't know much about this sport, but let's, you know, let's play and, you know, let's see what happens when someone who knows nothing about it picks, you know, your fantasy picks relative to experts and how we do, and have fun with it, right? And then I think, more to your other point, continue to try to find points of connection on things that I would really be passionate about. So again, back to music, like for me, music is a big one. So on music, I could be like, oh, you know, I love this. And so I remember one of my first job coming out of business school was at a company called Overture that had invented paid search. And on Fridays at 5 p.m., they would always play Crazy Train, you know, Ozzy Osbourne's, I think it's Ozzy Osbourne's Crazy Train. And it would be a lot of fun for the whole office, and somebody would bring up topics around music and so on. And, you know, that would be something where I would totally connect with the team.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I mean, music is the universal language, they say.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can end it soon. I'll end with this last question. First of all, I just want to say that it's so cool that someone at your level is just comfortable being their authentic selves. I love the journey that you've come from, as far as maybe not being as comfortable and confident to where you are now. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you realize this, but you, just by simply being yourself, are a mirror for other people. Like, I'm sure someone looks at you and say, well, I can do that if he's doing it. So just want to say I appreciate, on behalf of me and the community. I'll end with this last question. You know, as you continue to look at your journey and continue to strive to be your most authentic self, what's one thing that continues to inspire you and empower you to be your most authentic self?
I think it's that notion that as we all become more aware, more open, more embracing, and more authentic, we can all be more powerful, right? We can all really, I mean, think about, some people call it your moment of genius and so on. Think about when you're at your best and everything that is involved with that. I think that authenticity is one of the core components of when you are at your best, right? So what inspires me is that, right? And again, I don't think that being your authentic self is a constant, right? I think that over time that also changes, right? Because your passions change, you know, lots of things in your life change. So I think it's an ongoing quest, if you will. And the notion of connecting authenticity with that moment of genius, if you will, and the power that it can unleash is something that inspires me, and I think it will inspire me forever, right? So that would be the thing, if you will.